What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another installment of some of our online lecture series. This one actually comes from Principles and Labs for Fitness and Wellness, and that's actually from the 15th edition. This is more toward the generalized parts of fitness and wellness and health. We do get into, as it says on the screen, addictive behaviors. And this is really interesting because it's more psychological based. This is more behavior management based. It really goes in a way or direction that's kind of away from like exercise, but it does have bearing, especially for this type of course, on the general wellness part of everything. Because as we know, wellness is all encumbering. And it really takes on a lot besides simply working out and eating better. All right. So for this right here, we're talking about chapter 13 of that text. It's addictive behavior. And we go through many processes of the addiction, or actually, I want to say substance abuse or just becoming more of that property of addiction, where we talk about like chemical dependency, we talk about specific drug use, we talk about things going from high to low in terms of like heroin all the way down to caffeine. So here's your learning objectives here. You can pause here, take a look and see what we're going to be going through. If you're going to be working in the wellness capacity, one of the things you're going to not be working with is that the top one there, the heavy drug base. But you never know, you might, and that really becomes critical to learn more about the properties of those drugs and what they do to people to help them in that dependent state so that you can help them. But in more situations for us, we're looking more at the bottom focus there of things like tobacco use, things like caffeine, things like alcohol. Those are the main things that we're probably going to be diving into in our real life jobs. So let's kind of hit down into the main parts here. Substance abuse, very serious problem within our country. It seems like every year there's a different thing meaning a drug or a chemical that we have an issue with. Tobacco, I feel, you know, I'm 42, and I feel like this is one of those things where when I was younger, it was tobacco, alcohol. And that was because it was so prevalent and so widely used. Well, now tobacco is still widely used. It's just that it comes in different forms now. And because things like cigarettes are not as, I mean, some may say they're not socially acceptable. Others may say, because you got to figure it's not socially acceptable because you can't smoke in a lot of public places like you used to be able to. I mean, I remember as a kid going into like the shopping malls, adults could smoke in there. On airplanes, I remember there was a smoking and a non-smoking section. So there's a lot, restaurants that all that like. So, because it's not as noticeable, we don't see it as a problem, but it still is, you know. But we can go from high to low here again, high, heavy chemical dependency in drug use, all the way down to something as simple as caffeine, or even getting into the other dependency part of it being like work. So, what is our job? We need to understand that chemical dependency is destructive, not just to the person, but to the others around them. And also, we have to be able to educate for ourselves and to others, what these addictive behaviors are all about. All right. And that's what we're going to kind of dive through and just continue to understand more as we get through these next few slides. So, addiction, you know, it's a problem of imbalance or unease within the body and the mind. Imbalance. You got to figure there is a basically an optimal level of balance that we have in our system. We don't want to be too low, we don't want to be high, you know. And because of that, anything that goes beyond those optimal or range of optimal levels can become a massive problem. And that imbalance leads to consequences. All right. So, chemical dependency, most serious form of that. but there is an imbalance because you're going beyond what is the expectation. Now, things like heroin or like that, it's one of those things where the first time you try it, the aspect of it is that in almost all cases, the first time you try it, you're hooked. It becomes immediate chemical dependency, and you're going to be wanting it and wanting it and wanting it. That's direct from research, but that's also direct from firsthand experience with individuals, working with individuals that I've had. They were very blunt and honest in saying that, after the first time, this is what we were up against. So that becomes the concern there. Now, examples don't include simply chemical, but there are also things like work addiction, shopping addictions, exercise addictions, food, television, social networking. All of these things become challenging in terms of excessive amounts that we have, excessive amounts of work, shopping, excessiveness, television, etc., etc., etc. You can go down the line of all these things. Gambling is another one that's not listed there. So you can see that there's examples that aren't just chemical, but they are ways of imbalance because we're over abusing the situation. So, how do things develop in this manner? Um, Factors the predispositions to addiction. Um, there's reinforced or allowed behavior. You know, um, let's be real. As a kid, there were parents that were a lot less strict on certain things and others that were overly strict on things. So it's like, okay, there's no fine balance between that. But, if you're not reinforcing, that there's negative consequences to it and you're allowing things to occur, it's only going to get worse. That's just the nature of how things are. If you're allowing yourself to have 5 cups of coffee a day and then the next day you're struggling because you're not having 5 cups, you're allowing that behavior to occur. You got to find ways, it's just going to happen. So you're attempting to meet basic needs. You're trying to relieve stress in some way. There may be some peer pressure. In sports, there's something we call pressure to perform, but that's not just sport. You got to think about work at that point too. There's always this sense of pressure being put on you to be able to achieve something, and then self hate. So, peer pressure is social based. Self hate is more individual based. So you also have it does fit within a person's value system. So there could be issues of that where, oh well, that's part of my day to day, and it's what I believe is okay. There's an escape from serious physical illness or pain. You got to remember here that like opioid addiction, that is you're just not getting what you need in terms of how you feel without the medication. So therefore you need it and then you become dependent upon it. There's your addiction. There's a presence of a genetic link that can be the case for some things. And then advertising encourages it. Now, advertising back in the 80s, and beyond that, it's because in the 90s it was really that shift of tobacco campaigning. There's not the advertising in the manner that it used to be, and they used to advertise it so that it was, cool, and it, kind of fit into the younger crowd, and it just made sense for people. So because you're advertising it, you feel like it's cool to do or it's okay to do. So the addiction can start there. So with drugs and dependence, I mean, look at, in terms of how many millions there are in that right hand side, illicit drugs, 28.6 million people with illicit drug, dependence. Marijuana, non-medical or psychotherapeutic medications typically, or this non-medical use of, so you're using things that are supposed to be prescribed for somebody that aren't. Cocaine, hallucinogens, inhalants, heroin. Interestingly enough, with hallucinogens, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in the aspect of microdosing. That's a little bit out of the box here, but understand that, with things like MDMA and mushrooms, psilocybin, they're starting to see some shift in what the FDA or the government is seeing as, we can try to do this and we can try to work with this so that it can help people to get better, because there is some case study and some secondhand in research, because you're really not allowed to do research with illicit drugs at this point. But we're starting to see that there is a positive correlation in the way that we use specific drugs to help people balance out, the psychological components of things. So with a drug, let's get away from the graph and move to the left. Any substance that alters the user's ability to function. But remember here, user's ability to function doesn't always mean negatively. So, if we're talking about drugs, we could also be talking about caffeine in that aspect too. Now, there's an addictive quality to it, but there is also a level of misuse too. So understand that that's part of it. So with drug abuse, it's intentional and inappropriate use of a drug, just like alcohol abuse, same premise. It's intentional and inappropriate use of alcohol. And then what does it result in? Physical, emotional, financial, intellectual, social, spiritual, or occupational consequences. I mean, that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different consequences, and the abundance within each of those consequences of that abuse that you're dealing with. So super issue there. And then over time, you end up with drug tolerance. And so because of that, you need to shift how much of a dosage you need to have to make the drug feel like it's doing what it's doing. That's one of the main reasons why overdoses occur, is because the tolerance becomes such a high level and the drugs are so harsh that you're taking so much of it that you're not getting the high that you had or the high that you're chasing, and you end up ODing because of the fact that this dosage is far beyond and your tolerance has become so much more. And that right there is when, we start dealing with, like I said, overdoses, and then, the worst case scenario being death. So let's tone it back a little bit. All right, from that harshness to caffeine, most widely consumed psychoactive drug. 80% of adults in the United States consume caffeine daily in some form. Now you're like, well, I don't drink coffee. It's like, well, coffee is not the only thing that contains caffeine, so you got to be aware of that. Now, caffeine has some, besides, like it says here, effects on the body because of a high intake. You get jitteriness, insomnia, anxiety, depression, nervousness, and dizziness with high intake. And like it says here, it's linked to heart attacks and sudden cardiac deaths in high, I will say it again, high dosages. So this text, in my opinion, but this is just my opinion, and it may be different from others. This text is a little bit more aggressive on the use of it, and it's like a scare tactic. But yeah, there can be heart attacks. There can be sudden cardiac deaths because of caffeine and overuse of caffeine. But there's also some very positive qualities to caffeine intake as well. But let's just focus on what the textbook has to offer. So current trends: teens who consume energy drinks report higher rates of drug, alcohol, and cigarette use. Tough one for me to swallow here. I do consume energy drinks, but I'm not a drug user. I have very limited alcohol intake, and I do not smoke. I feel like it's just a way of correlation that they're trying to find connections. So mixing energy drinks with alcohol is also a concerning college trend. That's been around for a little while now. So it's not something, let's be real, Red Bull and vodka is not something that's, unheard of. So, but we have to understand that you're using a caffeinated beverage, which is more like an upper, and you're using alcohol, which is a downer or depressant. So you're kind of, your body doesn't know. It's like fighting against itself to figure out, like, what am I doing here? So can be can be overly concerning, or it just can be, oh, I've had one once in a while. So just be aware that these are trends. These are not guaranteed actions throughout the country. We have non-medical use of prescription drugs. We talked about that in the chart here. The third one down on the right, on the right-hand chart. So drug poisoning is the second leading cause of unintentional injury deaths. So the problem here we have is that, you get hurt, just say, for example, and you get prescribed something. You're going to a psychiatrist and you get prescribed something. You go to a doctor and you're prescribed something. So what are the, so we have opioids, central nervous system depressants, and stimulants. So any of those can lead to unintentional injury deaths. Like it says there, it's drug poisoning. You're not using them correctly, and that becomes a problem. Now everything is so drug dependent and how the effects on the body occur. So you can't just label it as one specific type. So um, the thing about prescription drugs is that they're prescribed. They're not. So if you're not prescribed a drug, then it's, you know, non-medical use of a prescription drug. So even if you took someone's 800 milligram ibuprofen, technically that's non-medical use of prescribed. Well, actually, that's wrong. I shouldn't say that, because that is prescription. That's, basically you're illegally taking a prescribed drug because you were not prescribed that. It sounds wild to me because of the fact that you're not going to get in trouble for that, but understand that, like, technically you're in illegal possession of it because that's a prescribed medication versus going to the store and buying, you know, ibuprofen soft gels, and four of them equals 800 milligrams, which is the same as the prescribed ibuprofen. So, see how it's like a catch 22 there. It's like, oh, that's weird, but I don't think you're gonna. I think if you had someone else's prescribed 800 milligram ibuprofens on you, you're probably not going to catch a drug charge for that. But understand that because you're taking someone else's and it's not prescribed to you, that it could be used, it could be considered drug abuse, because why are you taking them? And that becomes a concern. Inhalant abuse. Now, I'm unsure of the current statistics, like up to the date 2024 on this, but it's not unheard of for people to do whippets, whipped cream canister, taking the nitrous oxide out of that and only getting the gas out of it versus the actual whipped cream. Cooking sprays, deodorants, so you're talking about, huffing, you're talking about whippets, you're talking about, sniffing glue. So those are some problems that inhalant abuse can, you're talking about anything from like turpentine to, gas, all those types of things. It can, because of the effect of these inhalants, it can lead to suffocation. It can lead to arrhythmias of the heart. It can lead to sudden cardiac death. There could be respiratory issues, so on and so forth. And then, current trend wise, about 24 million Americans have used inhalants at least once. That's a wild number to me. It just seems really, really high. And then 600,000 people aged 12 and older currently abuse inhalants. So again, wild numbers to me. It just seems, astronomical in terms of, I guess I just never realized how prevalent it was. Next thing, again, trying to be a little bit more understanding of everything going on in the world. Marijuana. Now, when we look at marijuana, there's a lot of things that are coming out saying, there's always been positive aspects to it, but we're starting to see that there are, some catch-22s, I guess. Some things that we thought were okay that might not be. So it's one of those things where now that it's become a little bit more medicinal based and more frequently found as medicinal in specific states, that opens it up a little bit more to drug research in terms of marijuana. So I think that we're going to start to see a little bit more different aspects of research than we normally would. But it is the most widely used. It's still an illegal drug, unless, and just because you're in a state that, has medical based card, it doesn't mean it's still legal for recreation. So you got to be careful, if you're working with people who are, are they using it correctly, and are they even allowed to be at that point? So you still can get popped for it. So what is it? THC, delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That's your THC. All right. What are its effects? Tachycardia, dryness of mouth, redness of eyes, impaired memory. Um, you know, could lead to weight gain. Obviously, there's tons of evidence that marijuana can lead to unexpected eating habits. So you have that problem as well. Um, but there is evidence that shows that if you're regularly using it, there can be some physical and psychological dependence. Not on everybody. There are people that can, just stop cold turkey and not ever smoke again, or take an edible again, or whatever it is that they're using. But there is some level of dependence that can come from it, and kind of like cigarette smoking, like with the smoking aspect, that's typically where that it becomes a thing, a dependence thing and a crutch, because you're used to, like the cigarette, you have that dependency of the nicotine, but there's also the smoking part of it, the physical aspect of smoking it. And then, like I said before, the government has allowed states to amend possession offenses and decriminalize or legalize marijuana. So there is some changes going on. Cocaine, sniffed, smoked, injected. Now, just remember cocaine. It says it in the next one. I wasn't sure if it was there or not. You also have cocaine. You have crack cocaine, which is crack. It's a different way of mixing the cocaine to create crystallized. It's basically crystallized cocaine. It's usually cheaper because it's cut, meaning usually you're putting, typically it's baking soda, but there is an ammonia effect. There's an ammonia base that you can use too, and that cuts the cocaine from it being pure to then cut, meaning that it's not as raw as it can be. But those are the, sniffed, smoked, injected. There's its effects on the body, loss of appetite. It's crazy because like you heard of people, know of people that are heavy cocaine users, and they're all like skinny, skinny, skinny because they just don't eat. They don't have this feeling of eating. But you have the loss of appetite. You have digestive disorders, weight loss, which we were just talking about, malnutrition just because you're not hungry and you're not eating. Insomnia. Cocaine has that upper sensation, so you don't ever. There's issues with having problems sleeping, confusion, anxiety, and then there's cocaine psychosis, where again, the brain kind of disorienting itself. Methamphetamines. Um, it is a highly addictive form of amphetamines. Now, that classification of amphetamines is very wide, because you can have amphetamines that I don't think, there are still a couple that are out there that, certain like pre workouts and weight loss, supplements that are out there that do contain an amphetamine component to it. They've been trying to track that down and kind of crack down on that, have people change the chemical composition of those. So there's that part of it. But amphetamines can range from that low level supplement all the way to which still can cause problems, don't get me wrong. But there's also the, meth issue, where, there's that addictive problem. There is the death problem. There is the overuse problem. It just becomes a super, super huge problem. And because we're so close to the Mexican border, we are seeing a lot more influx of it, because it's more lucrative for cartels, where there used to be a little, I think it's, in some ways, I feel like meth has crossed over because of the legalization of marijuana in many areas. You're starting to see more of a meth trade than you are a marijuana trade, so there's always that part of it too. um it's a synthetic agent. It has to be created and made, again, more crystallized format. Effects on the body: increased body temp, blood pressure, heart rate, breathing rate. There's a decrease in appetite, kind of like Coke. There's hyperactivity, tremors, violent behavior, and hallucinations. Such negative consequences there. There's also irritability, paranoia, strokes, hypothermia, convulsions, sudden death, which obviously is the worst case scenario, and then insomnia as well. So you can see that there really isn't anything too great about it, you know. But people get hooked on it, and it becomes a serious problem. Then you start talking about issues of disformation. The look on people. You start seeing people have wearing away of their teeth and rotting of their gums and facial changes. So there's so many negative components to it that it can become really debilitating. MDMA, um, typically pill form, but it can be, there can be a smoking base to it. There can be a snorting, and then there can be some injection to it. Uh, it does carry very similar characteristics to stimulants and hallucinogens. Some of the effects there: decreased sexual ability, rapid eye movements, blurred vision, faintness, chills, muscle tension, teeth grinding, seizures, kidney failure. Can to higher levels lead to heart attacks or strokes. Um, Now, interestingly enough, on the other end of the spectrum, you're talking about using it recreationally. If we look at it from a microdosing standpoint, like which I was talking about before, MDMA has actually shown to be very useful, very small, 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 not the 120 milligram pills that you're buying, or the small caps you're buying, but it's super small doses that are usually uh, regulated by the administer. Usually, there can be doctors that administer those, and because of that, they're starting to see that we can help with things like anxiety, depression, PTSD. There's some major help that can happen with this. So same like I said with mushrooms. So here, um, interestingly enough, the image is a little bit in the way, so let's kind of counterbalance that. Now, with heroin, okay, it is a narcotic. Uh, it's come from poppy plants. It's an opioid. Uh, what are we talking about here? Injection based. It can be it's put intravenously or throughout the muscle. Because heroin comes in powder format, it can be sniffed. Also can be smoked. So there's all these again all these manners in which you can consume them, but the effects on the body are just the worst of the worst. Nausea. Well, I mean, we'll start small and go big. Nausea, vomiting, intense itching, asthma attacks, convulsions, hallucinations. See, we're getting worse. Sexual difficulties, impaired vision, reduced fertility, boils. So markings, growths on your skin, collapsed veins. Now you're talking about blood supply issues. Significant, elevated risk for lung, liver, and cardiovascular diseases, and obviously death. Um, and they're starting to see, not starting, they are seeing that heroin just becoming more and more powerful. And because it's more, even though it's more powerful, the cost of it is just it, the high. It's let's be real. It's kind of like going and buying a Corvette for the price of a smart car. That's kind of like, I hate to say that, but because we're not using it in positive terms, because I would love to be able to buy a Corvette for the price of a smart car, but we're talking about those high limits to low cost, and that's where it becomes a problem. And this is what's happening in regular homes. We have individuals who start getting hooked on opioids, right? And they start getting hooked on a pill, and those pills run out. Doctor's not going to prescribe you anymore. The teledoc isn't going to prescribe you anything anymore. You can't find them on the street because they cost too much, because you don't want to pay that much money. Well, what do? It's an opioid. You want the same high, so you end up working with heroin, and heroin's cheap, and you can take it in different ways. And because of that, it becomes massively problematic. And now you're talking about people like housewives who are there raising their kids that are now getting, doped up on heroin, and it becomes a massive family problem, not just a person problem. So we have to look into that. So now we're looking at, there's all, like I was saying at the beginning, there's always these issues with, these new drugs hitting the market. And because there's these unregulated substances, we're starting to find that effects are made to mimic controlled drugs on these unregulated substances. And so we have this issue. So what are we talking about? We're talking about synthetic drugs. We're talking about like designer drugs, things that are made usually in a lab, and you can find what they're made of, and people can make them in their homes, or people can make them and sell it. So it becomes a massive problem. Well, because they're also synthetic, all of the things that we talked about with the previous drugs we talked about, you have those concerns. Plus, because it's synthetic, now you're using foreign substances for the body, and you're now causing more and more problems than you had before. Um, things like synthetic cannabinoids. Man-made chemicals that are like THC, usually a little bit more bang for your buck, more potent, and they can now you're talking about things like seizures, high blood pressure, anxiety attacks, hallucinations, nausea, loss of consciousness, and chemical dependency. Yeah, because you're trying to get the high of weed, you're now causing more problems. And then although you're trying to do that, look at the bottom there. Some samples tested show potency that could be 100 times more than what marijuana is. So, you're looking at, again, more bang for your buck, but you're in the end it doesn't seem to be very effective in that regard. So, the synthetic part of it is what makes it different. Alcohol. Now, alcohol more regularly used because it is socially accepted, and because even though it's socially accepted, there is still a high abuse rate, and that's one thing that I can say I never really experienced, and I can't speak from experience on that because I don't have that like addiction, like I don't need to drink every day, but I can see where it I can see why it would be abused. So that becomes the concern there. Now, there are, like it says here, there's modest benefits and decrease in the risk of cardiovascular disease. But again, you're talking about risk versus reward here, and the ratio is in favor more of risk over time than the reward of potential cardiovascular disease concerns. Um, so, like it says here, there's a synergistic effect or a synergistic action with alcohol. Like it says here, if it's combined with other drugs, it can become life threatening because we are talking about the fact that, like I said before, alcohol is a depressant. So, if you're going to put a central nervous system depressant into your system with alcohol, you're just basically shutting your system down on purpose. So, that's a serious, serious problem there. Take a look at some of the things up top there, if you want to pause and read them about problems that can occur within the system, between brain, the immune system, liver, mouth, your heart, the stomach and intestines, and the reproductive system. So take a pause and look at it and see what it has to tell you and what some of the offset concerns can be. So with the effects on the body, though, if you've ever drank before, that can start messing with your vision. Hearing can become a little bit, off. There's slower reaction times. That's why on the side of an alcohol container, it always says do not operate, basically a warning, do not operate heavy machinery. It's like, yeah, this is a no-brainer because your senses are just becoming unfine tuned. Like it says here, there's lower resistance to disease. There's the chance for cirrhosis or hardening of the liver, which if the liver actually can rejuvenate itself a little bit, but in this case, if you have cirrhosis, there is no rejuvenating at that point. It's just if those areas become hardened, they're basically deadened and they cannot be fixed. Higher risk of cancer, there's cardiomyopathy and more that come with it. There's also the addictive and social consequences that come with it. Just understanding that there's more to it than just the illness or the disease part of it or getting sick from it, but there's this potential that there can be a genetic component to it, placenta blood interaction that can occur early on. Some people might have some, there's been linkages to certain genetic DNA linkages, so there's that part of it too. So we have to be aware that, we if there's that cause of concern and there's this addiction component, it can become problematic. Then you start talking about like college based, or just in general within the household. Alcohol abuse can lead to, like it says, mental, emotional, physical, and social problems. And again, I've stated this a couple times before. It's not just the person who's doing it that's it's leading a problem to. It can become all those around them, family members. There can lead to domestic disputes, child abuse issues. There is a large for alcohol abuse or alcohol addiction. There is a very high rate of divorce that comes with that. There is a high rate of law enforcement need, and there's also a need. There's also a issue with finances and loss of money, because that's where your money is going. Now, with alcohol on college campuses, it's the number one drug problem among college students. Um, there's the issues of excessive drinking, binge drinking. All those lead to things like unplanned or unprotected sex, chances for disease spread like HIV. There's the issue with law enforcement again with date rape, and then there's alcohol poisoning, which is can lead to death if not taken care of. So we have to be aware of that. And obviously on the right hand side you can see that heavy alcohol use with college students and what the effect is. So, in terms, it's kind of interesting. It's look at the number of drinks based on GPA, and you're talking about somebody who, if they're consuming over 10 drinks, they're saying that those students are more likely to be they're the more likely is to be failing or making low marks in the grades. Whereas if you're a student who drinks less, which they're saying like having 4 drinks per week or less, you're more susceptible. You're basically more likely to get an A than you are, and but it's variable at that point. But you got to set your limitations. You got to know when to say no. I feel like I'm back in the 6th grade dare class, but it's true though. As an adult, you got to be able to put your adult shoes on and set reasonable expectations and limit yourself. You got to be able to be like, nah, not tonight, or if you are, sip, drink slowly, dilute your drinks. Doesn't mean just put water in it, but there's other things you can dilute your drinks with, like if you're gonna have like, just say Jack and Coke, or and just you're gonna put more. You're gonna have be like, can I get half of the alcohol and more of the soda, and you can kind of adjust it that way. Drinking on your own is always problematic, so don't do it. And then there are apps out there that can help you with trying to adjust as you go. So there are ways to help. It's just are you able to manage that? Now, treatment for addiction in our field, if we're looking at personal training, strength coaches, wellness coaches, going a little in a little bit different way, getting up to physical therapy and chiropractic, and having PhDs and masters, we're not likely going to be working directly with treating addiction, although we could. Less likely, but not unheard of. But what I'm getting at is, even though we learn about it, we need to use these resources. There's always ways to help people, and we may just be the people that are that shoulder that they need to. I hate to say it, but that shoulder that people need to cry on, even though maybe people aren't crying, but we need to be that vocal point, or that person they can respect and trust and come to and need. So these are other aspects to help with that, but it's going to take a team to be able to help somebody get through an addiction. I've been around it, know it firsthand throughout a long period of time in my life, and I've worked also in an inpatient facility that worked on addiction. worked on individuals that just could not handle themselves, and it really is. It's tough to see. It really is, and it's really hard. Even though you may not have any, like with family, it's different because you have a direct relationship with that person or people. But when you're at work and you deal with it, it's a very different ball game because you don't have that investment like family, but you still are invested in trying to get them to be to be better, and you work really hard at that. So use these tools and get people the help they need. And if someone that you're working with, even if you're a personal trainer, starts talking about it, you have the resources to help them and have them find ways to just get better. And again, it's that willingness to change and the understanding that we have to, change to get better. But unfortunately, it's up to that person, and which is sad because you can't make the change for them. They're the ones that need to. So we have to think about it in that manner. Um, so getting past that, now we're getting into things like tobacco. So less, a little bit, a lot less aggressive here. Um, but you can see here, smokeless tobacco use, cigar use, cigarette use. Um, I don't know when this was, but I can tell you right now that I feel that if it was the most current research, I feel like this would be shifted in some way, or there would be another category because we know that the popularity in vaping has become so aggressive that I feel like this whole graph has shifted, and it needs to shift again because of the change in use, which again we talked about at the very beginning. There's changes in use which change the abilities or changes the dynamic of how we can help people. But one of the things we have to understand with tobacco was that it was socially accepted for so long. Um, it wasn't really an issue until the Surgeon General started to release their findings that tobacco was problematic, and as of here, that was 1964. So we have to be aware of that. And that young people who smoke are more likely to abuse other illicit drugs. That there is findings in that. That's not something that is unheard of. But like it says here, upwards of 9 times more likely to use drugs if they were smokers between 12 and 17. So it just creates this problematic arena of concerns within a person. Pipes and cigars, smokeless tobacco, cigarettes. But again, we're going beyond that, and we're saying that now we're talking about vaping concerns as well. And there's your effects to the cardiovascular system, which are present, and it's not made up. So 80% of lung cancer is attributable to smoking. Obviously, there's other environmental factors that come along with that on top of genetics. It is the leading cancer killer, which is not cool. No one ever wants to see that become a concern. And then on the right hand side there, you can see where this is basically your normal versus your not normal alveoli and your bronchi and your bronchioles, and you can just see how it just creates such a massive issue within the whole system. And then your alveoli, which are supposed to be a lot smaller, are becoming overinflated because there's constant gas exchange going on as a smoker. Also understand that it's not just smokers. We're talking about secondhand smoke as well, which is obviously another concern we have. Healthcare costs are brutal. You know, half of tobacco users will die from use. That's crazy. It's like, oh, well, if you smoke, you're going to die. Okay, well, I'm going to smoke anyway. It's just wild to me. So to me, it's just unheard of that that would be such a thing. And then with the image there, again, where are the cancer concerns? They're all there. So take a pause and take a look at that. But it's rough. It's rough out there. Um, but main reasons why smoking is addicting. Nicotine is that main problem of that. Interestingly enough, though, when nicotine is by itself, there is some potential positive weight management uses. but it's kind of like, okay, there's that risk versus reward thing. It's not worth doing, but because it is so addicting and it can become problematic. But it's that thing where nicotine is that creates that addictive behavior, and then there's like I was talking about before. There's those physical traits of the smoking aspect. And that's the behavioral part of it as well that can lure people in. Um, and then it becomes a pharmacological concern as well, and then it becomes very similar to like the massive uses of heroin and cocaine, where you become dependent upon it, and typically it's not physical dependent. Well, heroin is physical and psychological. Cocaine is not. Cocaine is actually the dependence. The addictive property of cocaine is it's usually physical dependence, not psychological, because people enjoy it. And you're not going to become addicted. Like if you did cocaine once, you're not guaranteed to be addicted. But that doesn't mean go out there and do that. So there's these issues that happen because we're trying to lump things together. But the main thing here to understand is that with tobacco, it's the nicotine that becomes the issue, and then it becomes the physical, pharmacological, and behavioral aspects of it that create more of that addictive property. There's obviously a plethora of reasons why people smoke. They do have what's called the National Clearinghouse for Smoking and Health. They do have basically a test as to 6 factors there: stimulation, handling, pleasure. It's a crutch, a craving, and it becomes habit. And what they do is they find what are the main causes for that, and by doing that, you see what their major concerns are, and where and why. And then from there, what you can do is help work on that. And that becomes more of the, okay, well, are you doing it to relax? Are you doing that because you're stressed? Are you doing that because it's habit? What is the main function? And then you can go from there. So then with smoking and smoking cessation or stopping of smoking, nicotine does make it very difficult to quit. And like it says here, 20% of people succeed on the first attempt. So 2 out of 10 people. 70% of all smokers would like to quit and they can't. And then 91% of successful ex-smokers have quit on their own by quitting cold turkey or using self-help kits. But that's 91% of successful ex-smokers, people that have maintained their stopping of smoking. That's not 91% of people who smoke. That don't mistake that. It's 91% of ex-smokers, which means that cold turkey, just I'm done. This is it. I'm done with it. Or kits that can help them. That becomes a positive for them. So there are some plans here. They're not foolproof, but deciding firmly that you want to quit. Like I said, you have to know you want to quit. Begin a diet and exercise program that can take your mind off of it. But you can't do the unimaginable, which is take one addiction and move it to another addiction. That becomes the concern there. And really what happens is that that happens a lot. And it's really kind of scary because it's sad because you're trying to find something that you do well, and then you end up replacing it with something else, and that's really a concern there. Um, Typically, that's called substitution addiction, because you're substituting it. So just be aware. So you can't just go for all in on one and then have an issue with another. So you want to decide on the approach you want to use. Create a log. Set target dates. Making sure that you're using, because smoking can sometimes bring down, it can be used as an appetite suppressant. It's sometimes people have they have this urge to eat more. So by having like little small meals available and such, and drinking more water, that can be more beneficial. And then not keeping cigarettes handy. You don't want to have them around. That's not going to help you in that regard. So with quitting cold turkey, it's exactly like it says. You're just stopping right then and there. Um, Now they're saying on average, as few as 3 smokeless days are sufficient to break that physiological addiction. Um, but the psychological patterns are what take longer and they stick around longer. And you hear these ex-smokers say, "It's been 25 years since I touched a cigarette, but I would love to have another one, and I know I can't because if I do, it's going to start a bad, bad habit again." So you can see where it doesn't fully go away. Same thing with drug users are the same way. They'll tell you like I haven't had such and such a drug, or I haven't drank such and such an amount of or a such and such amount of alcohol or any alcohol in X amount of years, but they're like I want one today. And some days are harder than others, and I'm sure you've heard people say that. So, just because you quit cold turkey doesn't mean that those feelings don't, hang around. The other way to do it, cutting down gradually. It's exactly what it sounds like. Um, tapering is the main word there. And then nicotine substitution products like patches or e-cigs. Now vaping is the new craze now, so we have to be aware of, just like cigarettes, how long is it before we start to see that, is there benefits to it? Is there not benefits to it? We haven't seen that longitudinally because it's new, and that's the main problem. Okay, so those are there, but again, fewer side effects potentially for those. And then life after, talking about all the withdrawal symptoms, the what are the benefits though, um, especially when you're successful. So that life after cigarettes, or tobacco, or any drug or any substance. This is you have all these things that occur, but opioid withdrawal symptoms can be very, very aggressive, and they could lead to having medical episodes. So you have to be aware. But yeah, this is for cigarettes only. So you definitely want to make sure that making that habit for those who people you're going to help, making that switch is going to be beneficial. So, but yeah, this is addictive behavior. It's a tough thing. It's a tough concept. It's a tough topic to talk about because it can hit home for a lot of people. So we have to be strong-willed when it comes to addictive behaviors, in terms of helping people, and we need to just be aware that you never know what can happen, because one minute it might be going really well, and then 5 years of not doing drugs or drinking or smoking, and that person's right back doing it again like they never missed a beat. So we just want to stick with it with people. So thanks for listening as always, and feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm always one of the things that I do recently is we're accepting donations for our work here to keep doing more of these videos. It becomes challenging when you're trying to get the right equipment and the right recording stuff. So I'm hoping that eventually here we can get to the point where we can start doing a little bit more of live streaming versus like lecture recording. So well, we'll see what happens. But thank you again for listening, and we hope to hear from you all soon. Leave comments, questions that you might have, and have a great day.